2020 and 25 years of Delphi. It all started in 1995 and I started with programming for Delphi out of my bedroom. And with that, I'm the oldest member of the team. And I have here next to me the newest member of the
Hi.
TMS team. And so, Gjalt, I wanted to ask you, being the newest member of the team, being here right now, a little bit more than 1 year. How was your experience learning Delphi, getting to grips with Delphi, and what would be your advice to aspiring new Delphi developers?
Well, actually, I started programming when I was 16 years old in school, and I started with C#. And the funny thing is that in school, when they were talking about Delphi, they said that it was an old language. So we actually already assumed it also was a very basic language. So when I saw the application, I thought that I had to start working with assembly kind of language.
Oops.
So
yeah.
binary, almost putting in the instructions. But then for the job interview, I did some research and actually saw that it was quite similar to C#, even had a GUI to work with. So that was my big surprise. So the actual advice is, it's not that hard to overcome it because it's very similar to C# or other higher programming languages.
So what you say is that the step from C# to Delphi was quite easy for you.
Yeah, it was a really small step.
It's not surprising that it's easy because, Gjalt, you know it,
Yeah. Indeed.
Anders Helsberg, our friend working at Microsoft right now, he is the father of C#, but obviously he's also the father of Delphi. So it comes from the same mind, the same brain, so it's kind of normal, I think, that it's familiar and that it's an easy step to make from C# to Delphi. So that's your advice to others, don't be afraid.
Yeah,
And
take the leap because it's a very small one.
just get started.
Yeah, indeed.
All right.
Now I have a question for you, and that's why did you start with Delphi and not any other language or something?
Okay. My very first programming steps were with GW Basic, the basic that came with Microsoft DOS, where you had to put in the line number for each line of code that you wanted to write, which in the end was quite horrible because you started with writing like line number 10 and line number 20 and line number 30, but then you wanted to add code and you needed to add that code to line number 15 and 16 and 17, but then you ran into a problem and you had to make a go-to from line 19 to line 1055 and then back to line 20 to add that piece of code because of all the line number troubles that come from that system. And so to me it was a big relief. It was like an eye-opener that there was something like the Turbo Pascal compiler in 86 to be precise, the Turbo Pascal 3 compiler that accepted code without any line numbers. That was a fantastic experience. And what's more, we could compile that code and it would produce an executable, and we could run that executable without touching the compiler again. Otherwise, with BASIC, you always had to go through opening the code and letting the code run. And here we could produce an executable. The compiler was also lightning fast. So it was like, you have to remember on an old computer, an 86 processor, even then the compiler was lightning fast. And so that experience was really great. And so I enjoyed it, and I followed the path from Pascal, Turbo Pascal 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then of course Microsoft Windows started to become popular. And Borland at that time introduced the Turbo Pascal for Windows. So that was like the next logical step to take. But that was kind of horrible experience to create user interfaces with Turbo Pascal, as you had to use a tool called Resource Workshop to edit your user interfaces and define all the IDs for the user control elements in that resource workshop, and then open Turbo Pascal for Windows to make the linking, the hooks from the IDs of the control elements that you had created in the resource workshop to the Pascal code that you wrote. And then of course came Delphi, which was really an eye-opener, something groundbreaking, where you could get rid of resource workshop and you had everything in one IDE. The designer, you put controls on it, component based, red based, that was like love on the first sight. And that marriage that was created from that love on the first sight with Delphi is still present till today.
Okay, so we can conclude that not everything was better in the past.
Certainly for Delphi, things have been improving all the time.
Okay.
That's the good thing about this software. So Gjalt, I was curious, what specifically do you like in the Delphi IDE or the Delphi way of working?
There are actually a lot of things, but most of all, it's the garbage collector, or actually the lack of a garbage collector. So for performance-wise, you can choose when something is deleted, while in other languages, if the memory needs more place or CPU needs something, they just drop it. And even if it's something like programmable, very important, they just toss it away, while in Delphi, you can choose when to delete something.
So you like being in control?
Yeah.
And determining yourself when you will use the CPU to free memory instead of someone else.
Yeah, especially for very critical things, it's very important to have that luxury.
All right, great. So the garbage collector, or the lack of a garbage collector, is actually your first thing that comes up.
Yeah.
What about cross-platform?
That's also something very good. And it's also, it's not in that many programming languages as well. So it's a great thing. But yeah, I think, yeah, the garbage collector is something that more is...
That stands out.
Yeah.
All right, good.
The biggest difference with other languages.
Great.
So Bruno, my question for you is, after those 25 years, what is your most memorable moment at a Delphi conference?
All right. Then I don't remember the exact year, but it was a conference in the US, where Delphi for .NET was first being talked about. And at that point in time, the compiler team had the first bits of the command line compiler for Delphi for .NET ready. So there was not yet IDE integration, etc. It was just a command compiler that was ready. At that point in time, Anders Helsberg was already working for Microsoft, because he's the man behind C#, he's the man behind .NET. And on that conference, Borland had invited Anders Helsberg. And Anders Helsberg was given the task to do a presentation with the Delphi for .NET command line compiler. And so what Anders did at that point in time in his presentation was use the Delphi compiler to write Pascal code, driving an ASP.NET web application. And that presentation was mind-blowing. I still remember it as if it was yesterday. And when I think about it, I still feel goosebumps, because the easiness and how fluent and how fully understanding all the concepts and the way Anders Helsberg brought that presentation, did that live demo without a glitch, based on just the first bits of a Delphi 4.NET compiler that was ready at that point in time, that was astonishing. That was like a moment that I will never forget in my life, and I think that clearly indicates the greatness of Anders Schelsberg.
Absolute brilliance.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Hat off for Anders.
Okay.
So Gjalt, a little bit more than a year, you are joining the team here now in Belgium, working for TMS, and I think we can say that you already have been diving into a lot of things here.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, what were like the most exciting things you worked on in this time? What did you like the most? What did you think is the most exciting?
Well, a lot of the time in the beginning I was working on the high DPI, so the monitor, the screen, so that you have a good, clean, neat component on a high DPI scale and on a normal scale. That was my first task actually. So it was crawling through the codes and trying to find out how everything works. But it was a really good step to learn everything, how the components work, and the workflow of a component, because of the create VND, load it, and so on. So that's something that I really learned then. And then my last thing was the Office 2019 styles, so that our TMS components have the new look of the Office, the white, the black, and the gray, so that now it's a flat style of components, so that it's a neat application that you're creating. And currently, I don't know if I can say it, but currently I'm working.
I permit you to say it.
Okay. Currently I'm working on a FNC Cloud component, the
right.
Slack API, so that you can communicate with the Slack application that you're using in your business to talk to your other employees.
Automated via components.
Indeed.
All right, two entirely different things.
Yeah.
UI on one side, and the cloud REST API usage is more business logic, is more non-visible code.
Indeed.
But you like both?
I like both. I like the difference between that you change between tasks and sometimes go to the backend, sometimes to the UI, and it gives a wide variety of the tasks that I have to do, and learn a lot of aspects of the job and the components that we use.
So what I often say, you can confess that life is never boring at TMS?
That's true. Not a day goes by when you learn something new.
Great. All right.
So my last question for you, Bruno, as you want me to learn a lot more, what is your favorite Delphi book and why would you recommend it to me?
Oh, that's a question. Well, I don't need to think, but I need to get the book. Just a moment.
Okay. While Bruno is away, don't forget to subscribe and be up to date with our next TMS videos. And like the video if you like it.
Actually, it's two books.
Two books.
Two books that I absolutely recommend to read from first to last page for every Delphi developer who wants to get to the core of Delphi for the component framework, how the IDE works, how it all integrates. And surprisingly, or maybe not that surprising, is that these books have been written by Ray Lischner. I have met Ray several times in California, and he was quite a character, we can say. And his books are amazing. So the first one is Secrets of Delphi 2. And this learns you all about the component, the VCL component framework, RTTY, how it all, you can have it. So surprising also is how relevant it still is till today. So if you want to learn all the internals of the component framework and the IDE and the property the property editors, object inspector, hooking, all these kind of things. It's amazing what you can do is in this book. And as I said, I think 95% of what is in the book is still usable today, is still knowledge that is relevant for Delphi developers. And then it was like the sequel of Secrets of Delphi 2 is the hidden paths of Delphi 3. And that goes further into details of IDE, RTTY, customizing the IDE. A really amazing, excellent work from Ray Lishner, edited by Danny Thorpe. Also a big legendary name in the world of Delphi, Danny Thorpe, who was former compiler engineer at Borland. So close working together with Anders Helsberg. There's also Alan Bauer at that time, Chuck Szczeski, who is now or moved to Microsoft then. That was like the core team in the 90s who shaped Delphi. And I think it's a testament to how solid it was created back in these days, that 25 years later, it's still such a powerful, useful tool used on a daily basis for, you name it, kind of applications that help us in our lives all over the planet.
Okay.
So Gjalt, I give you the books.
Thanks.
And so you know what to do in the evening.
Yeah. A lot.
All right, good. This was our brief interview between the newest member in the TMS team. And yeah, the reality is that I'm the oldest member in the TMS team. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more.